Hello and welcome back to Jazzonomics. I'm going to give you a few pointers here about which albums to avoid. I've made this mistake, I hope you don't. I'd like to show you all of the albums that I'd like you to avoid, but I've got rid of some of them because they were sitting in the house and making me feel somewhat disgruntled. The first one is an album that's on the Vocalion label. I don't have it anymore. I sold it for a pretty decent price actually. It was pristine. It was part of the Cardigan job lot of jazz vinyl that I bought quite some time ago. It's the only jazz album that I got rid of. I have quite a problem with live albums that sound poor, and this is one of them. Vocalion label, Charlie Parker, Bird at St Nick's. Don't buy it. The sound quality is absolutely awful. I thought there was something wrong with my stylus. It was so poor. It really is not worth investing in at all. The second one moves away from jazz. It's on the Decca label. Again, I had this on LP. I think this might have come from the Cardigan job lot. There are two distinct sides to this album. One is a studio recording and the second is a live recording, and the artist is the Rolling Stones, and the album is called Gimme Shelter. Studio recordings on one side sound perfectly fine. Live recording, I'm guessing it's from the early to mid 60s. I think it's recorded at the Royal Albert Hall. Sounds absolutely dreadful. Thin, tinny, screaming all over the top of it. Dreadful. Avoid at all costs. The third one is an album that I played this morning, and it's not quite as bad as I remember. It is a jazz album. It's by Miles Davis, Jazz at the Plaza. There are 4 tracks on this album. The first 2 tracks sound very good, and the tracks are Straight No Chaser, My Funny Valentine, If I Were a Bell, and Oleo. Some great personnel on this album: Cannonball Adderley, John Coltrane, Paul Chambers, Jimmy Cobb. Have I said Cannonball Adderley? I think I have. And then for the third and the fourth tracks, it really goes downhill. It's called Jazz at the Plaza, but on the third track, I'm not really quite sure that Miles Davis is in the building. He must have popped out for a moment. And the fourth track, both Coltrane, Adderley and Miles Davis sound slightly distant. Not as bad as I remember, but certainly not one to investigate. The fourth album is another album that I sold, and it's called PDB. It's a live Jaco Pastorious album. I'm not quite sure who the D and the B are, but the P is Pastorious. PDB, it's live. It was a posthumous release. I've read that it's probably one of the weaker posthumous Pastorious releases. It's really quite poor. I sold that. And the fourth one is not a live album, and it doesn't sound terrible. It just sounds clinical. Too clinical. Too clinical, too digital. And it is Barney Kessel, Red, Hot and Blues. Barney Kessel is a jazz guitarist, and there's some bumps written on the back here, and this must have been in the fairly early days of digital recording, and it was recorded in '88, and it says mixed to and mastered from digital tape using the Mitsubishi X80 tape recorder. The material on here is pretty good, and Bobby Hutcherson features on Vibe, but it is just so sterile. Moving away from jazz again, and this is an album that I've never really got on with, and it sits in the middle of Public Enemy's, to my mind, 3 greatest albums. It takes A Nation of Millions, Fear of a Black Planet, and Apocalypse 91, The Enemy Strikes Black. And the album that I've never liked the sound of, despite the material being right out of the top drawer, is Public Enemy's Fear of a Black Planet. A strange thing I remember about this album is an interview with I think the comedian is called an actor, is called Paul Kay, who used to be in Pulling, and he was in the Ricky Gervais thing, and he is probably most famous for being Dennis Pennis. And he said that at his wedding, him and his wife, their first dance was to Public Enemy's Welcome to the Terror Dome, which was slightly more imaginative than Westlife. Which moves me on to a great documentary series on the iPlayer. I think it's called Boybands Forever. It looks at Take That, E17, 911, who strangely always seem to be one of the answers on Ken Bruce's Popmaster. If there was a boy band on there and you weren't quite sure what the answer was quite often 911. I'm sure it was a running joke. Ken, you've been rumbled. I've saved the best, or possibly the worst, until last. It's an album that I listened to this morning. It's an album that I bought fairly recently. It was recorded in 1967 on the Impulse label. It's a live recording. It's the last live recording of this particular artist, and it is the Olatunji concert, the last live recording, John Coltrane. There are 3 tracks on the album, but the first one is literally seconds. It's an introduction by Billy Taylor, and I presume it's the jazz pianist Billy Taylor. The first track lasts for 25 minutes. It's called Agundi. It lasts for 28 minutes. I got 5 minutes into it this morning. I had to turn it off. It sounded like somebody knocking a fence down. Quite unpleasant. Then I moved on to the second track proper on the album, which was My Favourite Things, which obviously features on John Coltrane's My Favourite Things, one of the great jazz interpretations of all time, without question. I thought, right, let's see what this sounds like. The album features Pharoah Sanders on sax. It features Alice Coltrane on piano, Rashid Ali on drums. I was wondering what My Favourite Things would sound like. I was wondering whether there would be a melody that was discernible, how avant-garde it would be, because the first track is really right out there. Too out there for my tastes. So I put the album on this morning. My Favourite Things on this morning. It started with a bass solo. And I thought, right, I'll come back to this later. So I got in the shower, got out, dried myself off, cleaned my teeth, came back to it. The bass solo was still going on. That's a slight exaggeration, but the bass solo lasted for 7.5 minutes. And the My Favourite Things melody showed itself at, I counted this, 10 minutes, 25 minutes and 32 minutes. At 10 and 25 minutes, it was incredibly brief, fleeting, and at 32 minutes, we almost got a few bars of My Favourite Things. The rest of the song sounded like Happy Hour at the Abattoir whilst it was being demolished. Squeals, honks, crashing, bashing, thrashing, very little in the way of discernible melody. And it brings to mind this album that I used to like an awful lot around about 1994, Elvis Costello's Brutal Youth. And there's a song on here called This Is Hell, where he talks about the version of John Coltrane that he's playing is the version by Julie. He talks about, let me get this right, a version of My Favourite Things sung by Julie Andrews and not by John Coltrane. I can only assume that he's not heard this version of My Favourite Things, because I don't think Julie Andrews would be able to sing over the top of that without loosening some teeth. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that's been informative and giving you fair warning. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. This was Jazzonomics.